Let me start with first congratulating the Upskill project being where you are at this moment, tying the last knots together and delivering such nice results at the end of this project. And as I said in the beginning, I'm really inspired by the things that you have been doing in the project. And so we hope just to bring some other perspectives. So what I'm trying to do is just summarize some core ideas of the Bridges project from the perspective of the Upskill project. So just to add to what we are trying to add to what you kind of information that you're bringing. So the Bridges project is in the same call as the Upskill project, but since there were some hesitations at the beginning, we started the project somewhat later, and our project carries on also 1 year longer. So we're going to finalize at the end of this year. The 2nd of October, we're going to have our final conference here in Brussels on the top of the Royal Library. If you want to participate, you need to look at the website and see how to connect there. Okay, so some key thoughts we're not completely at the end, but let's say most of the research itself has been finalized. And so I'll give you 4 thoughts that we have from our project, and which are, I think, quite aligned with what the Upskill project brings, but it gives it comes from a different approach. So the first Industry 5.0, we were in the core of Industry 5.0. So we didn't have this idea of Industry 4.0. Our project was the follow-up of the Beyond 4.0. So what comes after 4.0? 5.0, of course. So Bridges 5.0 was defined as the bridge towards 5.0. So that's how we started and what our core idea was. It requires organizational change. I think that's the core idea that you can see in the Upskill project. You cannot do human centricity if you're only focused on the technology. Even if there are a lot of researchers out there writing papers on human-centric technologies, it really requires an organization to make these technologies work. The second is our project has a very quantitative part, big data, but also analysis of a lot of surveys. And it's my belief that it's not only ethnographic case study research that you need, but also this kind of approach, and I'll try to show how that works. With skills, I think that she already said it. Our perspective is that a lot of research on skills has been doing that the wrong way, from the wrong perspective, doing it all backwards, as I say. And then the last part that I want to share is our project is also about interventions. So we have training interventions that we're doing in companies, and they deliver some insights into some things that you also have seen, even though that our interventions are much more structured in what we're doing. So let me start with the organization. So we know that companies with the same technologies have totally different results. So that's something that we need to understand, that it's not technology that determines what's going to come out. It's the way organizations pick that up. So organizational conditions, they define acceptability of these technologies, the way skills are going to be shaped, how the relationship with the customer will be. Industry 4.0 technologies are not per se bad. They are necessary for the changes that we've seen. I think that the Upskill project and the cases that you've shown have shown that Industry 4.0 is crucial for a lot of things, but it's not the only technology there. So that's what we need to understand. And if you want to transform an economy, you can't do it by just supplying a lot of new skills, by supplying a lot of technologies. No, you need to change the managerial practices in practice. So that's, and in that case, human centricity, I think, is a game changer and is something that we should develop even more. I think we will come back to that in the policy discussions at the end. Our project has several takes on Industry 5.0, and we've done it from the intervention part, but also from the quantitative part. And since the upskill project is mainly from the qualitative part, mainly bottom up, we have something that can be put next to these results. So, but big data is one of our parts, and it is an enormous pie, an enormous amount of information, and you need to slice it up into a lot of things to get insights. So we have been looking at big data sets of vacancies. We wanted to look at the OVATE database of Cedefop. Great database, but the required information that we wanted to have on the companies, that was cut out. So that was not available. So that's something, our recommendation also, to add that, and then we would have more insights into what is going on. Company financial data, we used also Glassdoor. We also used ESG data from companies, but there are even more data sources that we've been checking to understand what is happening in practice in these organizations. Of course, I know a lot of the remarks that exist about these data sources, like, well, are companies sincere if they project themselves in vacancies? Well, can you lie with financial statements? Possibly. There are a lot of companies that go broke because they've been lying in what they're saying. Does every employee only want to say bad things about the company they've been working in? So can you trust that kind of information? ESG data, well, the pension funds rely on that, but isn't that also a bit greenwashing? So the question is, you may have a lot of questions about this kind of information sources, but there's a lot of convergence in what we find, in what we see in this kind of data, and we think that what we find in this kind of data does give an indication of what's going on the labor market. But we not only trusted this, we also looked at EU, country level, and company kind of surveys that were collected within these organizations, structured information on these elements. And what we can see is that we can see from this data that Industry 5.0 is well and alive in Europe. So depending on the country, 30 to 60% of companies can be put in the corner of Industry 5.0. So, and I think that's important to state, because it from the makers of Industry 5.0 and from the discussions, it seems as if this has been invented. As of it's new, and we need to get grip of a lot of companies to do that. But there are a lot of companies doing that. As I saw for the upskill presentation, companies did not know that they could call that Industry 5.0. It's afterwards that we say, well, this is more aligned with what we think Industry 5.0 is. With skills, as I said, we've been doing that all backwards. So what is the dominant approach? Well, 15 years ago, the task-based approach was launched. It's about understanding work and labor markets, but it's starting with the occupations, splitting it up into a lot of tasks, and then trying to identify which kind of skills are there, and putting automation in that equation. And there's a lot of work on classifications of these skills and those kind of things, but you're looking at the reality, you're seeing all these skills, and you're trying to understand what's going on, and investing a lot of money and effort to do that. But a task is just a task. It can be automated, but what is going to be automated, as the upskill project that's shown, depends on managerial decisions, on approaches and things that are happening in the company. So you should start with your organizational approaches. They determine tasks, skills, technology, and the outcomes that are there in reality. I'm not going to elaborate on this, but this shows the correlation between all these elements here. Okay. The vacancies, the reviews, the companies, ESG, and the kind of activities that the companies are doing, in which we can say that some of them are more related to Industry 5.0. But you can find that back in the report. We're also looking at the interventions. So we're looking at the intervention called Training Factory. We've enriched this Training Factory intervention with Industry 5.0 ideas. We have several pilots, and what we have experienced is that these companies find this kind of approach quite enticing, quite interesting. There is a lot of enthusiasm for these kind of approaches. Well, we went to visit Infineon. They used the teaching factory as an instrument to do an organizational change in a fully automated factory. Lights out everywhere. Here also. There's we can see that the teachers are key change agents in these approaches. These things were not expected, but we've seen that. We also have the learning factory intervention, which is in the schools, looking at the technologies that the companies need. Also there, we can see a lot of things, but let's say the difference with the teaching factories, which starts in the companies, is that with the learning factory, it starts in the schools. And there you have the institution of the schools, which block a lot of things, which make it very complicated to have changes in their programs. So we had a lot of things going on there. But in all cases, we can see that we can change these interventions, that we can get into these organizations and make the approaches which are needed there. And I want to congratulate you all again from the full Bridges team, but you can't see it because it's all in white. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was perfect timing. Do we have any questions from the audience? 5 minutes for questions. Yes?
Thank you. Thank you. Really interesting looking project. Looking forward to reading your results as well now I've heard of you. I agree with your concerns about ONET and the various ways our colleagues in economics have of classifying jobs.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the only quantitative approach. I'm sure you're familiar with the UK Skills and Employment Survey, which came out of Skelly. They ask some very, very simple but very powerful questions. Yeah. Things like, how long does it take to learn to do your job? Yeah. How long does it take to learn to do your job well? Yeah. And that you could say was a task-based approach, but I think is very different to the one you condemn, and one that would sit very well with job changing, with automation, with introductions of technology.
Yeah, but we have them in on the right side of the presentation with all the surveys. Right. So we have the five countries that we have the national surveys. We also have the European Manufacturing Survey, of which 800 companies have described what's going on, and so we have these results now available. So you can look into them. And I'm sure these questions are very nice. The only issue with these surveys, and that's why we did the big data, is they're 2, 3, 4 years behind reality. So we wanted to have something to look into today to see what happens. That's why the big data was used.
Thank you. Brilliant and, I think really complementary to what we've done. Could you tell us a little bit more about the training factory and the learning factory? I get the idea that the learning factory seems to be interventions in schools. Yeah. But the training factory is not an organisation. Yeah. It's a simulation, and then ideas and lessons can be taken from the training factory into an organisation. Have I got that right?
So the training factory is based on problems that companies have. So companies have a problem, and so what to do? And so and what happens with the training factory is that you then develop trainings by what the workers and those dealing with the problems want, and what they think is needed to solve this problem. So it can be a technological problem, it can be something else. And depending on the situation, you define your trainings needed for that. And so what we've done is add to that the elements of human centricity, elements of sustainability and resilience, and we've guided them through the process. Just like I said, we had this experiment with the Infineon. There they had this, they created this empty factory. but they had operators that did several tasks. What they did, bring these operators into a control room and to understand what was needed for these operators. But the operator said, we're not just going to do this jump and just sit after a screen and do. We want to define what our work is going to be and how we're going to do this change. And so that's what was the training factory. And so we had 5, in fact, of these training factories that we developed. And the learning factory is technology driven. So it means you have several technology settings. Students can learn how to work with them. They implement them in organizational settings if needed. And then you see what comes out of that. And then the technology can be implemented, but the students can also follow the technology. So that's a difference.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. I would invite the next speaker.